Hi everyone, my name is Gaurav Baheti. I'm the founder and CEO of Procol. Today with me we have Peter Sharoff. He's a former Chief Procurement and Sourcing Officer of American AXA. Um, it's good to have you today with us, Peter.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Um, I'd love it if you can start by your introduction for our
Sure.
audience.
Sure. So, as Gaurav said, my name is Peter Sharoff. I was most recently the Chief Sourcing and Procurement Officer for AXA XL, which is about a $20+ billion in premium global commercial insurance company. I like to say we insure everything from horses to satellites and everything in between. And there I was a sourcing and procurement officer. I had procurement report to me a couple of times, but I think it's fair to say that I am what I would call a late convert to the discipline of sourcing and procurement. And as is often the case, people who choose a discipline rather than get stuck there by career path are often more passionate about it than some others. I'm very passionate about what sourcing and procurement can bring to organizations. My background is in financial services, so much of what I say is from that standpoint. To give a little broader view, before in being in sourcing and procurement, my career really was defined in banking and insurance in a variety of transformational roles. This included things like running technology teams, bringing together two companies when they would merge. I would run the integration teams, putting in place continuous improvement project programs, and so forth. And so it gives me, I think, somewhat of a unique view on sourcing and procurement. And once I got involved in it, and I like to say I fell in love with it, it really, I think, helped me to convey that to the rest of the organization. I think that in financial services in particular, sourcing and procurement teams are often still fighting for that seat at the table. So that's me.
Thank you for that amazing introduction, Peter. You mentioned that you come from a different background. I think I'd love to know, how did you get first into procurement?
So the first time I had reporting to me, it has to do with the fact that sourcing and procurement usually drives a disproportionate amount of value when you bring two companies together, right? It intuitively makes sense. You're bringing two contracts together, you're aggregating demand, you have more buying power, and so forth. There's also the hidden opportunity to really go in and look at the business processes of those functions that you engage with. And so whether it's technology or finance or HR, they're also renewing how they look at things. And so it's an opportunity to look as well at the demand side. So when I was bringing together a company called XL and a company called Catlin, once we'd gotten past legal day one of the merger, we had sourcing and procurement report into the integration team so we could really drive the value. And to give you some sense, we had estimated $300 million of savings out of that deal. Almost a third of that was coming out of sourcing and procurement. So that was my first exposure. And then after we had brought together AXA's corporate solutions business and the XL Catlin business, this is now 5, 6 years ago, we knew we needed to make our sourcing and procurement function far more mature than it was. Neither organization had a particularly mature capability. And there was recognition on the part of the COO, which I think is exactly right, that simply doing the same thing we did yesterday but better might not be enough. Right? We really needed to take the opportunity to change how we perceive, change the culture. And given my background in transformation, he asked me to take that on. And I'll be honest, I did some research first, right? I didn't want to just go and be in sourcing and procurement but when you look at the trends that affect the value sourcing and procurement can bring, it really is a fascinating place to be. So that's how I ended up in that role. I will admit I cheated a little because I went right to source procurement lead, but nonetheless, it was really by active choice.
Right. Thank you for that context. Just how many people did you manage in procurement more recently?
Sure.
And how much procurement did you manage overall?
So the spend was about 1.3 billion, give or take, depending on the year. The team was, now this included travel, and included real estate, included a few things, was about 70 people.
Wow.
We had built a very strong presence in Gurgaon and New Delhi in India, where we had a very nice career path from basic P2P ops all the way up to global category manager. It was our single largest location, but we also had Paris, New York, and London, so it was a global team.
Wow. And how was this structured, for a quick context, within 70 people?
So the most recent structure we put in, so let me give a, it's an interesting question. Let me take a step back. When I first took it over, we put in place what I would call a very, very basic construct, right? You organize yourself around the categories. We had someone for claims because claims is its own animal with an insurance company. So we were looking at claims procurement. We had various managers by category. And we had everything under that category. So our technology category manager had everything from category management, supplier relationship management, sourcing, basic contracting, and so on. Very verticalized. In the most recent organization that we put in place, we started to separate out supplier relationship management and category management, basic tactical buying and contracting, simply because they are very, very different modes. When you look at what organizations are looking for, they want speed. They want to be nimble when it comes to sourcing of low value, low risk items. Since we operated in 60 countries around the world, we really needed to make that as streamlined as possible. Contrast that with big dollar spend, complex spend, where you may be taking on a lot of risk. You may need to really develop strategic partnerships. And we wanted to split the organization in that way. So now to answer your question. So we had one vertical that was tied to indirect spend overall. And in there, we had split the strategic category management and SRM for technology from the basic buying. And if that was successful, we were going to deploy it further. We have what we would call direct sourcing and procurement as a second pillar. And direct included not only our claims, but also certain other consultation we did with the business. If, for example, they were looking at cyber insurance, then we were working with them on some of those concepts because obviously we were very familiar with it. We had a strategy and transformation line, which had operations and programs to improve things. We had a real estate line. And then we had a new group called third-party risk management. And third-party risk management was not only what you would normally find, which is the basic running of, making sure that we plug into the assessments from information security and privacy, but in fact, we internalized that to sourcing and procurement. And we had a team that was there to really understand the third-party risk requirements from the regulators we dealt with, which, again, they were around the world, so it was very complex, but to really make sure that we were doing that as efficiently and effectively as possible. So it was a little bit broader than just vendor risk management. It was a team we were just putting in place the last year that I was involved.
No, that's very insightful. In fact, I think most companies are going in that direction where they're setting up
Yeah.
these teams newly as well. Um, I find it very interesting that you've already done that, and you can share insights with the world about that. I think people would be happy to reach out to you on how you did that as well. Um, Moving on, what do you think is the biggest challenge that procurement professionals are facing in 2024?
Ooh, it so in some ways it varies by industry and company. So I'm going to take a step back and give you a very general one, right? So the biggest challenge that sourcing and procurement to me faces is what I call the cardiologist problem, right? When you go to the cardiologist and they tell you certain things need to happen, you don't really understand what they're saying, but you listen because you assume they've had lots of training, they deal with this, and you have no prior knowledge, right? None of us really understand the details of cardiology unless we're cardiologists. And so the person who's, accepting the service acknowledges they do not know. And so they're willing to listen, they're willing to learn, they're willing to make trade-offs. But people buy things all the time, right? Whether it's small things, complex things, everybody's buying something somewhere along the way. And therefore, they're in the worst position, which is they think they know something, but they don't really. And as a result of that gap, unless you're a sourcing and procurement team that has built really strong bridges throughout the organization, the level of investment is just too low, right? And so expectations have been mounting and mounting and mounting, right? Not only is it, hey, you've got to drive savings, but now it is you have to deal with geopolitical risk and cyber risk and ESG, whether it's D&I or sustainability, and, but very rarely is there more resource yet to come. You could deal with that with great process and technology, but all too often the technology bill is much higher, and we're told, look, the payback isn't good enough because they don't understand what that payback could be. And so for me, the biggest challenge remains figuring out what would give you the biggest lift and having the time to address it. Now, I think that takes a lot of different views depending on where you are. For some, that means, oh, hey, I'm not going to be able to try my AI experiments. They're more mature. For places that are less mature, it could be as simple as, listen, my folks are running around every day just trying to get purchase requests into the right categorization so we have good data, and we don't have time to do anything other than that, right? It really varies, but ultimately, for me, the biggest challenge sourcing and procurement has is just not enough time in the day.
Yeah, truly said. And I'm sure with a team of 70 people, there might still feel lack of bandwidth to get initiatives up and running. Um, yeah, I can relate to it. And I've heard other procurement leaders also talk about this challenge. Um,
Yep.
but I also feel that there are initiatives that can free up time and
Mhm.
get more bandwidth on the plate. So maybe what do you think what is the number one thing that you think a company can be missing out on if they're not implementing procurement and software technologies that you might have seen at your previous experiences?
The list is very, very long. So the first thing I will say is I think it's critical, and I know you know this. You have to have a good, solid process before we start putting technologies on top. Technology doesn't solve anything if the process is poor, right? So assuming you solve process and technology, it frees you up, as you alluded to do many, many things. First and foremost is to get the data, to interpret the data, and to understand what that data is telling you in terms of what you need to do next. Now, what that is will vary. In some cases, that may be that you need to focus on the supply side, generate scale. In some cases, you may need to bring third parties in to manage it because you can't generate scale. It will tell you a lot about the demand side and really working with your stakeholders on the demand side. Frequently, at least in my experience, the lack of time shows up with people not spending enough time with their big suppliers, really engaging and understanding what the suppliers can do for them and creating a true partnership. So, I think having the right process and technology can free you up to do any number of things. The the biggest thing, this probably won't resonate for a lot of folks, but I believe so fully. The biggest thing that having that in place really allows you to do is to say no to things sooner, right? At least within my team, an awful lot of time in sourcing and procurement is burned doing things that are not going to ultimately add a lot of value because the stakeholder tells you they need you to do it, or doing things you have to have that clause, and so we're going to keep going back to the vendor and try to negotiate a clause they're never going to agree to. Having the time to build the case to say no to things sooner allows you to focus on the higher priority items.
That's actually a unique insight. I never thought about it like that. Yeah,
Well,
technology.
you can optimize any process you want, but if you can just stop doing something, you free up all the time. And it's the hardest thing in the world. And I apologize for jumping in because I'm on what we would say in the US is my soapbox. Sourcing and procurement attracts really wonderful people, right? They're people who love to solve problems. They're people who love to make a difference. And sometimes we're our worst enemy because we don't want to say, no, we can't do that, right? We're here to solve problems. But you can end up solving problems that are readily available versus the highest value ones.
Very well said. And I think I can resonate the same thing as you said in your previous answer, which is the cardiologist problem.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it can be hard to understand exactly what these solutions can really do. That it's very hard to like implement or adopt them. How did
Yep.
you go about solving for that and finding, okay, maybe this can solve your particular X problem? Did you start with the problem or did you start with the solution?
In terms of technology implementation or more broadly?
Yeah, technology implementation.
So you always have to start with the problem, right? Nobody is spending time and money without understanding what the problem is. And
Yeah.
oftentimes it's very hard to diagnose that problem. It's why I say you often need to just solve your process first. Because
Mm.
process, again, you can automate everything, but if you do good process work, you can get rid of a variety of steps, which not only decreases your technology implementation cost, but also speeds it up because there's less that you need to build. But for us, it was always a matter of defining the problem. What I'm There's a double-edged sword on technology when you use. Sorry, I should take a step back. One of the ways we solved it, we had gotten a fair amount of investment as part of integration to put in place a P2P system, to adopt a true contract management system, but we didn't get really any funding when it came to putting in place work inventory process, workflow, analytics. Thankfully, we had several people resident in our team who were very conversant in Microsoft Office 365 Power Apps.
Yeah.
And so they could build an awful lot of things on the fly. Now, that is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it allows you to quickly prototype and improve. And so this issue of, well, do you fully understand the problem? Do you not fully understand the problem is a little bit irrelevant because you can test and learn. The downside to doing that is once you put something in place, it isn't incredibly scalable. And so you have your own custom solution, but now you can't always justify spending the money on a more robust solution. Your technology team often isn't really thrilled to support custom solutions. So it has value to prototype, to really learn what you need. I do think ultimately finding those vendors who allow you to develop a little bit more on an incremental basis. I'm not going to use the word agile because that has a lot of connotations, but on a more incremental basis, want to get to, because it's hard to get everybody on board with the problem. It's hard to fully define the problem without putting some things in place along the way. Does that help? I'm not sure I specifically answered your question.
No, it did. And my next question is completely, being more specific on what were the top three biggest challenges that you had to address in maybe 2023.
So by the time we hit 2023, we had the basics in place, right? So it depends where you are in your maturity. For us, we had the basics in place, right? We had a good coverage ratio. We were engaged with the stakeholders. I would say that the three big areas were, one, as I alluded to, we had really stretched the tactical solutions as far as we could get them. And so we really weren't able to push on our data analytics as much as we wanted. We really weren't able to push on the connections, for example, between our customer experience analysis and the workflow that they had experienced to pull true learnings out of it. So we knew we needed to invest in something that was a bit more scalable in our data, our work process, and our related data and analytics. Second area that was fairly critical, and you've already alluded to it, was the third-party risk management. While we had decided we wanted to put that team in place, it still is very, very challenging, right? You need to work, again, in banking and insurance, a lot of this is regulatorily driven. So you have to understand what they want. They don't always know what they want. So putting in place the right steps that didn't bog everything down so that people simply went around sourcing and procurement was the next really, really challenging area. And the third one was just what I will call maintaining the bottom line. We had pulled a lot of the supply side levers. Inflation still was a problem in 23, less so, but still was a problem. And we really need to start shifting into demand side levers, getting people to change their process to optimize results, getting folks to be willing to bring some of the volumes together, getting us involved early enough in the process so we could really help them craft the right kind of solution creatively. Those are really the three things that we were spending most of our time focused on. Having said that, and I know you said three, but I'm throw a fourth one up. We really wanted to start to act as a force multiplier for sustainability and DE&I, which AXA, the parent company, valued highly. We wanted to really, use our leverage with vendors to get there. And I would say we just couldn't clear the bandwidth to make as much of a dent as we wanted. We did things, of course, like everyone does. But that was the biggest challenge, was really getting that as a priority. So if I added the fourth, I'd throw that one there.
No, because the list of challenges is never ending, right?
Yeah. Yeah, just go to Hackett Group procurement leaders. They give you the top 10 and you go, yeah, that's not nearly enough. 10 is 20 or 30.
Yeah, but the amount you mentioned on the coverage ratio sounds impressive. How did you get to that level of coverage?
So we had the advantage that AXA Group really thought it was critical that all spend have eyes on it. And so when we rolled out, we were using Coupa as our P2P system. So when we rolled out Coupa, we really put an awful lot of controls in place to get involved. Now that is not enough in and of itself. And honestly, for the first couple of years, it did create resentment in the organization because things that had gone through quickly before now wouldn't go through.
Mm.
And so there was an awful lot of outreach at all levels to make sure that folks understood we were doing what we were doing. We put in place a sensory system so that we could hear the complaints as early as possible. Because often, while you may not be able to do anything about it, if the person complaining at least feels they're being heard, At least that can help. And in some cases, we can do things. And so we really, focused on getting all of that in place. And then we started loosening the reins. And I would say probably not fast enough, right? I would say a big learning would be once you have that coverage, you need to step back and really get into what I call pre-sourced, right? Panels, PSLs. Really important that you have a more efficient way of dealing with it.
Yeah, we often at Procol when talking to customers, and we mostly talk about sourcing, because that's
Mhm.
what we primarily do. On sourcing, we talk to customers and everything running from email Excels to first time running digitally.
Yep.
That the initial 100 events require a lot of change management effort, but
Yep.
after that, customers do 100 events every month.
Yep.
And so it just picks up the volume really fast, and change management happens drastically. But as you said, first 6 months are absolutely critical, and if companies are able to navigate those times, I think they can transform themselves forever. um, but yeah, that's what we have learned, and
And
good to
and I
hear
think
from.
you've hit upon something important, right? So I think to a great extent, sourcing and procurement used to be, entirely about the contracts, negotiations. More and more, we are in a change in culture business,
Yeah.
right? How do you get the organization to look differently at the act of buying something, and to do so with a strategic eye, and really have the patience to try some different things? So I'm not surprised you find the second 100 go so much more smoothly, but it also speaks well of you as a company that you're willing to have patience and partner with your customers through that, because that really is the hard part.
Yeah, I mean, we are not successful if the customers don't absolutely transform themselves, right? So
Mhm.
for long-term benefit of ourselves, we are incentivized to stick around and deliver our commitments. So that's what I mentioned too. Finally, moving on, everyone aspires to become every young procurement professional aspires to become a CPO one day. Um, if you had to guide a younger self of yourself, what would you rather advise them?
Listen, I could go on about many, many other things. Learn about AI. Make sure you understand trends in risk management. Blah 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 blah. It's all true, right? But I think within sourcing and procurement, having strong relationships with your stakeholders, with your suppliers, is absolutely paramount. People in an organization are always willing to spend time with you if you are there to understand what they need. And often they're willing to work with you. And I'll give you an example. We had a particular executive who will go unnamed, who was just flat out the least cooperative executive we had, the least cooperative. And this particular person wanted to hire someone in a country we couldn't hire in, was trying to go all kinds of ways of doing it. And eventually we knew we had to find a way to help him, which, as I said, people in sourcing and procurement love to help. But eventually I sat down with him and said, listen, here's how we're going to solve this for you, but I need your help, right? I need you to tell everybody else about how by engaging with us and us listening to you, we got you to a solution. Because that's the missing link, I think, in many cases. But often experts, and sourcing and procurement has many, many experts, think it's talking that matters. And of course, I'm doing it right now. I'm talking ad nauseum. But honestly, listening is fairly critical. Understanding what it is your stakeholders need, what the corporate strategy is. You'll find you get ahead better in your career if you spend some time up front really listening to what everyone has to say, and then embedding your message within that. Because as you move up in the ranks, it's less about what you do and more about how you work with others to get more complex things done.
This is very relevant, and I think for both sides of the table, as procurement and as
Mhm.
sales guys,
Yep.
from the other side as a vendor, we tell our people just listen to the problems of the customer, and you will be able to discover a solution yourself because everyone wants some problems to be fixed. So what you said is, I believe, everything about growing as a professional. If you can listen well.
And to be fair, consultative sales has been around for decades, and obviously you're talking about consultative sales. I will often want to take over a new team, and this is not just procurement. I will say, imagine that we were a vendor, right? We're not in the company, we're outside the company. They've outsourced this to us. Here is what we would do. Like each of you is a salesperson and a relationship manager. And it's a mental game that I have the team play at some offsites, just to try to get them to think about it differently. Because just because you're in a company, it doesn't mean everyone's going to want to work together and get along. You still need to make sure you're proving your value and delivering something.
It's a really good metaphor that you mentioned. I'm a huge fan of making sure like every process owner understands. If you were an outsourced function, think about how you'd operate this. You will still
Yeah.
have to ensure the best customer satisfaction. And yeah, I believe so. So that's all for today, Peter. Thank you
Great.
for taking the time today. I
I
hope the
appreciate your
audience
having me.
I hope the audience enjoys this podcast as much as I love recording it. We should have this with everyone soon. Thank you again for coming over for the podcast.
My pleasure. Like I said, happy to be here, and I wish you all the luck in the world.